The year was 1977. The place Enfield, England. A quiet suburban town that would soon be thrust into the spotlight. An unassuming house on Green Street became the epicenter of one of the most documented and debated paranormal cases in history. This ordinary home would soon be known worldwide. This is the story of the Enfield Poltergeist, a tale that has intrigued and terrified people for decades. It's a story of a family terrorized by unseen forces, forces that seem to defy the very laws of nature. A story of objects moving on their own, disembodied voices, and a young girl named Janet Hodgson, who became the focus of the entity's wrath. Janet's experiences would become the stuff of legend. Imagine a cold December night, the kind that chills you to the bone. The Hodgson family, a single mother and her 4 children, are settling into their new home. They were looking forward to a fresh start, unaware of the horrors that awaited them. Little did they know they were stepping into a nightmare that would test their sanity and strength. What began as subtle bumps in the night quickly escalated into a terrifying ordeal that would haunt them for years to come. The events that unfolded would leave an indelible mark on the world of the paranormal. The Hodgson family's ordeal began subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. Strange sounds echoed through the house at night. Whispers, knocks, and footsteps. These noises seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once, creating an unsettling atmosphere. Furniture creaked and groaned, seemingly moving on its own. Chairs would be found in different positions, and tables would shift slightly, as if nudged by an unseen hand. At first, Peggy Hodgson, the matriarch of the family, dismissed these incidents as the settling of an old house. She rationalized the noises and movements, attributing them to the quirks of their aging home. But as the days turned into weeks, the activity intensified, and a sense of unease settled over the family. The once sporadic occurrences became more frequent and harder to ignore. One particular night, Peggy was startled awake by a commotion coming from her children's room. The sounds were louder and more chaotic than before, impossible to dismiss. She rushed upstairs to find their beds shaking violently. The sight was both surreal and terrifying, as if an invisible force was at play. Her children's terrified faces confirmed her worst fears. Something was terribly wrong. The fear in their eyes was unmistakable, and it mirrored her own growing dread. It was then that the true horror of their situation began to dawn on them. The family realized they were not alone in their home. An unseen presence was making itself known. The paranormal activity was no longer subtle. It was blatant, aggressive, and it seemed to be targeting the children, especially 11-year-old Janet. The once peaceful home had become a battleground for unseen forces, leaving the family in a state of constant fear and uncertainty. As the paranormal activity escalated, it became clear that the entity, whatever it was, had a particular interest in young Janet. Objects would fly across the room, seemingly thrown by an unseen force, often narrowly missing her. She reported being levitated in her bed, her screams echoing through the house. Her siblings witnessed these terrifying events, their own fear and confusion growing with each passing day. Janet's personality began to change, becoming withdrawn and prone to outbursts. She claimed to hear voices, whispering threats and obscenities. At times, she seemed to speak in a deep, guttural voice, claiming to be Bill, a former resident of the house who had died there. The family was living in a constant state of terror, desperate for help and answers. Disturbed by the escalating events, Peggy Hodgson reached out to the authorities for help. She had no other choice as the strange occurrences were becoming more frequent and intense, leaving her and her family in a constant state of fear and confusion. Police officers arrived at the house, initially skeptical of the family's claims. They had heard stories of haunted houses before, but most turned out to be pranks or misunderstandings. They expected this case to be no different. However, their skepticism quickly turned to shock and disbelief as they witnessed firsthand the strange and unexplainable phenomena taking place. The officers saw objects moving on their own, doors slamming shut without any apparent cause, and lights flickering erratically. Objects moved in front of their eyes, seemingly defying the laws of physics. Chairs slid across the floor, and small items like toys and books floated in midair, as if controlled by an invisible force. They heard the disembodied voices and witnessed Janet's disturbing change in demeanor. Her voice would change, taking on a deep, guttural tone that was not her own, and her expressions would shift from innocent to menacing in an instant. The police, despite their training to remain objective and rational, were left with no explanation for what they were witnessing. They had never encountered anything like this before, and their usual methods of investigation were useless in the face of such bizarre events. They could not deny the reality of the situation, yet they were ill-equipped to handle a case of this nature. Their training had not prepared them for dealing with the supernatural, and they felt helpless and out of their depth. The Hodgson family, meanwhile, were no closer to finding peace or understanding the dark force that had invaded their home. They lived in constant fear, unsure of when the next terrifying event would occur, and feeling increasingly isolated as their plight continued. They were desperate for answers, for someone to believe them and help them escape the nightmare that had become their reality. The family clung to the hope that someone, somewhere, would have the knowledge and courage to confront the malevolent presence and restore peace to their home.